Alright, so I managed to get mip mapping working, as you can see here. The there's three different textures on this, and it's mip mapped. The first texture is this wooden structure, um, and this is all from a tutorial that I've been going through. It's a pretty good tutorial. It's this site right here, and it shows it's learnopengl.com, or yeah, learnopengl.com. And even though it gives you the code, you could probably just copy it and do what you want with it. But like he really goes into like in depth about what everything means and how to do it. And he gives you exercises, and of course he gives you like certain things, uh, certain he gives you the answers afterwards, so you could try it, and then if you don't get it, then you could look at the answer, right? It's a really good site. I like it. But I was struggling with something. I wasn't understanding why something wasn't working. And what it was is the mip mapping wasn't actually working in the beginning because it was I was typing it in, and I didn't copy and paste it, but I was typing it in and doing the code, uh, and I ran it, and it just didn't work. I was like, oh, what the hell's going on here? Like, is it my program? Like, am I coding this wrong? Like, what? I don't understand. Because I made the new shader program, and I was thinking, okay, well, it must have something to do with that. And then I went into my Genesis file, and I looked at this, and I had to restructure the Genesis file to accept different textures if I wanted to mip map. And I also went into my vertex and data and added a pair of strings and GLU ints for my texture mapping, and also went back into the mesh file. So I changed quite a bit of things. So I was like thinking, okay, well, maybe it's something I changed, and then obviously, it has to be that. And so I probably spent a good like 3 hours going through the code and just looking at it and then giving up and then going to eat, and just it was so annoying. And I come back to it today, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna fix this. And I found out, like, I was here. Let's just stop this right now. So I'm just gonna change something real quick, okay? So I have it all set up in here, and it's always the small things that seem to get you. So when we change these to sample the texture, uh, it went from a float to an int, right? So here I had f f f. So you know, OpenGL is going to think, oh, those are floats, right? So this is what happens if you don't change that. So now it's just the box, and you're like, oh God, what's going on here? Like, all those things I spent a while on, and it's the only problem was changing that from a float to an int. It's like the smallest things will always get you. It seems like that, anyways. Because now you change those float to int, boom, texture mapping's working perfectly. And it probably would have been a good idea just to, like, I don't know, go through and like double check everything in his code and make sure that I'm implementing it correctly. Um, but I did that, and I just scrolled through it, and I was like, oh, this looks fine. Oh, this is good. That's good. That's good. Oh, this is good. Oh, damn it, what's wrong? So it's hard to see that one little tiny thing, from an I to an F, and it took, you know looking at the code, maybe, I don't know, 20 times, 25 times before I actually caught that. So that's it's kind of a important factor, I guess you could say, when you're coding, is that the smallest things can get you in trouble, and it can just screw your whole day up, or 2 days. uh, so I don't know. I guess it's a lesson to be learned. Always look for the smallest things. Always look for tiny errors in your what you're defining, rather than going and searching through, massive amounts of data or code. That I mean, it made sense to go back and look at it. It's interesting that I came across this problem because it's okay. So I'm in college right now, and we had a lab, right? And I'm in a lab class, chemistry, and we were setting up a manometer and a water aspirator uh, for um, reducing the pressure in our in an apparatus, distillation apparatus, so we could lower the boiling points of certain molecules that we're interested in, that have high boiling points. We want to distill it, but we want to distill it at a lower boiling point. So the way to do that is to use a reduced pressure. And so, I'm sitting here like got my whole distillation app. This is very relevant to this, by the way. So I have my whole distillation apparatus set up, and I get that water aspirator turned on. I make sure all my clamps are sealed because it's a closed system. It's a vacuum, right? Well, not entirely closed, but it's a vacuum, right? And nothing works. So there's no pressure, and I'm like, oh shit. Well, gotta go through everything, and I look through everything maybe 4 times, right? Turn it on again, nothing happens. I'm like, shit, what the fuck is going on? So I look at my manometer, and I'm like, okay, well, maybe it's a manometer. So I made sure that everything was closed. It was a closed. I made sure it was a closed system, and everything was closed, um, and everything looked good. And so I was like, shit, okay, well, maybe it's the faucet because that's where the pressure is coming from, right? So I go to the faucet, and I change my hose to a different faucet. And I'm like, okay, this should work. This has got to work. So I unplugged the hose, put it in the other faucet, turned it on, um, made sure all my seals were closed or were tightly sealed, or all the different places that could leak. I made sure it was sealed, and turned it on, and waited like a minute and 2 minutes, no pressure. I'm like, what the fuck? Okay, what's going on? Okay, time to get a TA, right? So I go over there, I grab a TA. I'm like, hey, something's going on here. I don't know what it is. So they come over and they look at it, and they're like, well, everything looks fine. It's good. And I was like, oh, yeah, I know. I checked it like 6 times, and so they're like, oh, maybe your manometer's broke. Okay, so I'll go grab a new manometer. Hooked up a new manometer, uh, and started again. Nothing happens. I'm like, what the fuck? And then the professor comes in, right? The professor's sitting there looking at it, and he's like, yeah, everything looks good. I don't know what to say. Like, okay, so he pulls off the hose from the um, from the water aspirator coming. That's where the pressure is being created. And he looks at it, and he's like, "There's no pressure coming through here." I was like, "What? I just changed that. There was no pressure on the first one. Okay, there's no pressure on the second one." So he turns it on, and there's no pressure. And so he takes the hose, and he he flings it around, and water comes out of it. And I'm like, "Oh, fucking shit! Water's blocking it from creating pressure, right? In the hose. It was crazy." And so I hook it up, and I'm like, okay, I'm ready to go now. So I turn the water on, and the pressure go. I wait for a minute, and no pressure. And I'm like, what the fuck is going on? And anyways, I go back to the faucet again, and I look at it and it looks like there's more water leaking into the hose. And so I take the hose and I fling it around and get the water out. And I go to a new faucet and put it on, turn the water on, works perfectly. Like the smallest things, water blocking the pathway from the hose uh, uh, to the point where it was connected. A little just drops of water. We're stopping the pressure. So I guess it's really relevant to this because it's like you think about you have a very small thing, you know, an F to an I, a float to an N. You got to it's just it's so small. It's right there. It's right in front of you. You just can't you just can't see it. And you just have to think of the small things first. Think of the things that make it work instead of thinking of the multiple things that. I mean, you can think of those too, but think about the simple things first. You know where it starts, and then go to the big things. I don't know. I guess it's a uh, life lesson learned there. Um, in two aspects of life, coding and chemistry. So yeah. Anyways, just wanted to show that little problems make big problems. Search for the simplest things first, I suppose. Then go for the larger things. Um, I mean, in in a sense, it did. It it was good to go back and look at all the code and make sure it was working correctly because I actually changed quite a bit of things and made it more efficient. Um, Especially when I decided to. Actually, I have this really great idea now about. Um, I ended up pairing some texture images. So when I load the texture, I define the texture. I'm probably going to give myself an option to load different textures for mip mapping. So maybe I'll have possibly another shader. I'm not entirely sure yet, but um, in case I don't have three textures to mip map, or I don't want to mip map, then I'll create a. I'm not entirely sure like how I could do it yet, but ideas are kind of going in my mind here. But right now I have it sending three different file locations to my. mm, This is to my importer from OBJ. So I import things from Blender. I texture them on Blender. I make sure they look good. I send the UV cord or send I import it into my program, all the texture coordinates and the position coordinates and normals, and then I give it a texture. So the textures that I put in, let's see here. Let's see if I can pull this over. There we go. So this is what I had in OBJ, and what I ended up doing was texturing it and mip mapping it in OBJ, and then getting the result in OBJ and saying, "Oh, okay, that looks really cool. I'm gonna go ahead and do that." But OBJ doesn't really like. I'm not entirely sure. Like, I'm still learning it. I'm getting better at it, but I can't seem to. I could look at different textures, but when I look at like the whole material here, it just looks like the matrix, right? And I don't know if that's because there's a certain setting that I have to click to make like the mip mapping show. But it in here it looked good because it wrapped everything together. And, I had all my different textures, and this is how it should look in OBJ. But if you're mip mapping, that should be your like I guess that would be the emission. The matrix should be the emission one. I could switch them around too. Containers should be the diffuse, and the specular should be this reddish color down here, or black and red and green in color. Um, I think I wonder if I'm gonna play around with this a little bit more, and see if I can get it to show in OBJ to see it before I actually load it. Um, but regardless of that, I got that down pretty good as far as moving and maneuvering around Blender now. But yeah, so I got the texture. So I give my texture files here. And what it does is it actually goes in when it goes through importing the OBJ file. It first checks for errors and stuff like that. Then it actually takes those files, the paths that are defined or given, and puts them into a material vector of texture maps. So I don't know if it's a good idea to put it into um, an undefined vector, because typically I'm only going to have, like, I guess you could have more than three. So it's probably a good idea just in case in the future if I want to add more. But for now it works. I'll probably come up with a different idea for that later. But pairing it here it actually works really well, because in my Genesis file I could loop through those pairs and just say the first and second, depending on what the texture is and how many textures I have. And then it'll bind them all. And I can create a map of multiple things, which is pretty cool, I think, now. So that function is working pretty well. What's the other thing? So oh yeah, the arrays. So here I just have like an array saying, okay, this is array 0. I want you to draw it. So now what I think I'm going to go ahead and do is actually make my vertex paired. So my vertex data here, all this data will be paired, and I actually have the vertex data in my mesh files right here. So right now I just have it as a vector of vertex pointers, right? So, and yes, I delete all those pointers afterwards, but right now I have it in a vector, just a vector of vertexes. But I could have a vector of a pair, and then have it at vertex and then a name. So then I can say, okay, I want to do this 001, whatever like ID I can give it. And then I actually know like what I'm copying, or what I'm writing to what I'm rendering, rather than just putting zeros and ones and twos and threes and fours and all that stuff. So yeah, I think that's probably the next thing I'm gonna do. I'll probably go through that this guy's tutorial. I'll go through a few more of those and learn quite a bit from doing this, actually. So these tutorials are good. So if you're ever interested in learning OpenGL, I definitely recommend this guy, or this person's material. Let's see, I should probably know his name. So he is Joey DeVries, um, and he is the one who wrote this. And he's pretty good. He knows what he's talking about. I definitely have looked at a lot of books, and some like OpenGL Vertex Shader books, and some books that some professors like recommended, and I just don't like. They're no good. They just kind of leave you in the dark. And this guy kind of brings you into the light, and says, hey, this is how you do it, and this is how you should be doing it. And then he gives you basics, and then you could figure out the rest on your own. But he actually gives you examples, and you could work from those examples, because examples are everything. Like if you don't have an example of how to structure something, and you've never structured anything before, then how are you supposed to know how to structure it? You know what I mean? And this guy kind of goes through it and kind of gives you an idea of how to structure things. Lighting is new to me, so his tutorial on lighting is actually really good, and I would recommend it. So if you're trying to learn lighting, he actually has some guides on getting started too. I think I used a couple. What did I use? I think I used his. Uh, it was in the that was a long time ago. I think I used his Hello Triangle tutorial like when I was first starting. Um, and then now I'm back learning about lighting. So he actually goes through textures and shaders and talks about transformation and vectors too, if you are interested in that. Yeah, so the small things first, and then look at the big things. So I guess that's the whole point of this video. Maybe I can favorite it on my. And whenever I get lost, I'll go back to YouTube and look at it and be like, "Did I look at the small things first?" So yeah. Anyways, y'all have a good one.